the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by Rollercosterwords, Chapter 155, The War, Winter 1978 to 1979.
Long ago, and oh so far away, I fell in love with you before the second show.
Saturday the 23rd of December, 1978, 1:22 a.m. "We could buy a boat," Sirius said, shoving one shoulder against the sofa. "No, drape it this way. Not that way. Hang on. Why would we do that?" James asked, swaying slightly as Sirius grabbed the blanket from his hands and attempted to drape it between the back of the sofa and the lamp. "Be pirates," Sirius mumbled, narrowing his eyes ruefully at the blanket when it slipped and fell to the floor. Building a fort had seemed like a brilliant idea half an hour ago, when Remus had finally thrown in the towel and stumbled off to bed. A few minutes later, Lily had followed after him, displaying an appalling lack of confidence at James and Sirius's ability to construct a sleeping space out of the living room furniture that would rival the comfort of an actual mattress. "Need a steel boat to be pirates," James slurred, laughing. They'd all gone out that night for drinks at the Leaky Cauldron, a sort of pre-Christmas celebration. It had been Mary's idea, as she'd be out of the country come Christmas Day. She was visiting her relatives in Jamaica for the first time. Sirius and Remus would be spending Christmas at the Potters, along with James and Lily, so they'd see each other anyway, but it was still nice to see their other friends. Yaz was spending the holiday with the McKinnons, since her family didn't really celebrate Christmas, and Peter had tagged along too, of course. Frank and Alice had even popped by to say hello, with Alice flashing her shiny new ring. They'd all crammed into a taxi back to Sirius and Remus's flat afterwards, where there was always a handle of something strong and alcoholic kept under the sink, and at the back of the cupboard. Everyone had ended the night utterly smashed, and once Remus and Lily began to serenade the room with Muggle Christmas carols, the others had finally decided that they would see themselves out. It was around that point that James had had the idea of building a fort. He and Sirius had been attempting to make the dream a reality for the better part of an hour. But so far, all they'd managed to do was shove a sofa into the middle of the room and fling the cushions off it. "Sailors, then," Sirius said, trying once more to drape the blanket across the makeshift fort. He was no longer entirely certain how they'd stumbled upon this topic of conversation, but now it seemed very important to figure out what they would do in their hypothetical boat. "Sail around the world." "Pfft," James waved a hand, stumbling down onto the floor. Apparently he'd given up on the blanket roof. "Who needs a boat when you've got magic?" "Could be a magic boat," Sirius countered. James seemed to consider this. "Nah." He pointed his wand at one of the cushions, and Sirius frowned. "What are you—" "Engorgio." Immediately the sofa cushion expanded, growing to the size of a mattress until it was crammed between the wall and the naked-looking sofa. "Brilliant!" Sirius whooped. "You're a genius, Potter!" James stood unsteadily to give a little bow before collapsing back down onto the gigantic sofa cushion. Sirius crawled up next to him, flopping down and grinning. For a moment they were silent, lying side by side. "Remember when we used to share a bed?" Sirius asked, smiling up at the ceiling. "Yeah," James chuckled, "before Mooney came and stole you away." "It's like that again. Or back at Hogwarts." "Yeah," James sighed, then reached to poke Sirius in the ribs. "Miss having you around sometimes," he mumbled sleepily. Sirius rolled over to face him, grinning. "We see each other nearly every day." "Yeah, it's not the same though, is it?" Suppose not." He rolled back over so that he was staring up at the ceiling again. "I'll be round for Christmas, though." "Yeah," James sighed again, and it turned into a yawn. He fumbled for his glasses, taking them off and throwing them onto the sofa, so that he could mash his face into their big makeshift cushion bed. "Can't wait for Christmas. Just want things to feel normal for a bit. Me too, Sirius sighed, frowning. He waited for James to say something else, but pretty soon the only sound coming from his friend's mouth was the familiar rumbling snores. Sirius shook his head fondly and shoved himself up onto his feet. He grabbed the abandoned blanket and threw it over James, then snagged Remus's jumper from where he'd left it on the floor and rolled it up to use it as a pillow, before tumbling back down on the opposite end of the cushion, where he would be the furthest away from snoring. "Good night, Prongs," Sirius mumbled, before drifting off to sleep himself.
Your guitar, it sounds so sweet and clear, but you're not really here. It's just the radio.
He woke the next morning to the familiar sound of footsteps creaking across the floor into the kitchen, where muffled fumbling about in the cabinets could be heard. Sirius groaned, rolling onto his back and rubbing his eyes. He had a horrible crick in his neck from sleeping up with a rolled-up jumper as a pillow, and his mouth was unbearably dry. "Is that the kettle?" he shouted, squinting his eyes shut against the early morning light that streamed through the living-room window. Above him, James snorted and twitched, woken by the noise. "Yep," Remus replied, raising his voice to be heard from the other room. "2 ticks." "Ugh!" James sat up, groaning and stretching. His hair looked like a family of birds had taken up residence overnight and tried to rearrange it into a suitable living space. He blinked, squinting around the room. "Sofa," Sirius said around a yawn. Sure enough, James found his glasses sitting where he'd abandoned them on the cushionless sofa. He grinned at Sirius as he shoved them back onto his face. Cheers. When Remus padded back into the living room a few minutes later with a tray full of milky cups of tea, James reached for one eagerly. "You're a hero amongst men, Mooney," he said reverently, cradling the mug carefully in his hands. "Oh, I know," Remus smirked, passing another cup to Sirius and perching delicately on the arm of the sofa as he sipped his own tea. "What the fuck have you two done to my furniture?" "Brilliant, isn't it?" Sirius managed to get himself seated in an upright position, and he grinned up at Mooney as he drank. "Prongs' idea. We did an engorgement charm." "Shall we help you two clean up?" Lily offered, yawning as she emerged from the bedroom. She plucked the last cup of tea off the tray, nestling into James's shoulder as she sat beside him. "Breakfast first," Remus said. "Fry up?" They all nodded. "Fry up." Remus led them to the nearest greasy spoons, where they glanced at the menu for all of 3 seconds before deciding to just order full Englishes all round, which proved to be the right decision. Afterwards, everyone returned to the apartment feeling much more energized and awake. Lily and James stayed to help tidy up the flat with Sirius, while Remus got ready to go visit his mum at the hospice. Sirius had to push him into the shower, insisting that the rest of them could handle the cleaning. The flat was in quite a state. Aside from the living room, the kitchen was a mess, covered in misshaped mugs and glasses, most of which still had the remnants of last night's drinks floating in them. The ashtray was overflowing, and there were stray cigarette butts scattered in some cups as well, which Sirius was sure had seemed like a good idea the previous night, but was very unpleasant by the light of day. Also, everything was sticky. Sirius placed himself on dish duty, washing everything in the Muggle way, while James and Lily put the living room back in order. When Remus stuck his head through the doorway to say goodbye, Sirius was up to his elbows in suds, and he had to take a moment to dry his arms before seeing his boyfriend out the door. Remus had dressed up a bit more than usual for the occasion, wearing a freshly ironed shirt under a brown corduroy jacket that Sirius loved. He had a poinsettia under one arm, an early Christmas gift. He wouldn't be visiting Hope on Christmas Day, and Sirius figured that it was probably best not to pry too much into that decision. Besides, he didn't want to share Mooney on Christmas anyway, even if it was selfish. He would prefer that Remus just stayed with him at the Potters. He'd already been going to the hospice every other day to see his mum. "Sure you don't want me to go with?" Sirius asked one last time, hovering in the doorway. Remus smiled and shook his head. Aside from the one time he'd brought Sirius to meet her, he only ever wanted to visit his mother alone. Sirius supposed he could understand why. When he was there, he'd half felt like an intruder, a witness to something intensely private. Still, he always offered, just in case. Sirius shut the door behind Remus, returning back to his dishes in the kitchen. After a few moments, Lily wandered in, snagging a dish rag to wipe down the sticky countertops. "How's the living room looking?" he asked her, rinsing out a mug. "Almost back to normal," she smiled. "James went a bit too far on the shrinking charm, and now he's trying another Engorgio to set that cushion right. I thought it best I leave him to it." Sirius laughed half-heartedly, nodding. After a moment, Lily asked, "How's our Moony? Doing all right?" Sirius shrugged, staring down at the sponge in his hands. Things were still strange between them, sometimes. Near the end of September, there had been a week where everything had gotten better for a bit. Sirius wasn't sure what had brought it on, but one night he got home from a mission and Remus was fussing over a pot of pasta on the stove, frowning down at a jar of canned tomato sauce as though it might bite him. The flat had been cleaned, the laundry put away, and he had smiled and reached out and tugged Sirius in for a kiss, murmuring "Hiya" against his lips. Sirius supposed that he hadn't realised how tense things had gotten until that point. Suddenly there was no more resentful glances when he left or returned from missions, no more overflowing ashtrays that meant his boyfriend had spent the day chain-smoking, no more crumbs on the sofa and scattered books with bent spines as evidence of Mooney's moping. Instead, the flat was kept tidy, the fridge fully stocked, the sheets changed. It had felt like a breath of fresh air. Of course, it hadn't lasted. The following week, Sirius had arrived home, and there had been nothing but dirty dishes in the sink, a growing pile of crumpled laundry on the bedroom floor, a fog of stale smoke that he had to crack a window to release. Sirius wished, desperately, that he knew what had caused the switch. If he knew, maybe he could fix it, change things so that Remus would quit moping again. But more and more often, there didn't seem to be any singular cause. One evening, Mooney would greet him cheerfully, studying one of the recipe books he'd borrowed from Mrs. Potter, or gifting Sirius with a takeaway from one of their favourite restaurants. The next he'd come home to find Remus curled up on the sofa, skulking, cigarette between his lips. They didn't fight. Sirius almost wished they did, sometimes, but there was no real arguing, no shouting, no yelling. Instead, they just murmured bitter comments under their breath, or snapped at each other about whose turn it was to do the laundry, or gave each other the silent treatment. The worst part was that Sirius knew what it was about. Knew that Remus resented being sidelined while he and James saw all the action. But it wasn't as though Sirius could control that, try as he might. He and James both talked to Alice and Frank, even Moody when they saw him, reminding anyone who would listen that Remus was just as skilled as they were with magic. But nobody seemed to care. So Remus resented him, and he resented Remus for resenting him. And Remus resented him for resenting his resentment, and they just kept going in circles, until Sirius couldn't see any way out of it. Sometimes he tried to goad Remus into talking to him, to get him to snap and explain what this was really about, but it just made the sullen boy clam up more, until eventually Sirius couldn't take it and would flee to the garage. So he spent a lot of time working on his bike. Those were the bad days. But on the good days, on the good days, Remus was sweet. On the good days they smiled and laughed, they kissed and touched and listened to records. They read stories to each other aloud. The ancient legend of Orpheus and Eurydice, Remus read, one evening in late October. Halloween was approaching, and James was determined to throw on a Muggle-style costume party, insisting that everyone dress up. In anticipation for the event, Sirius and Remus had spent the day shopping with Mary at a Muggle charity shop, where she was in her element, browsing through the ridiculous, garish jumpers and oversized hats. "You've already read that one," Sirius told him, throwing a piece of popcorn at his head. He was sprawled across the sofa, legs in Mooney's lap, head propped up against the throw pillow. "Yeah, but you haven't." Remus smiled, dodging the tasty projectile. "I know how it goes, though," Sirius said, tilting his head back to stare up at the ceiling. "Bloody stupid ending." "Do you think so?" "Well, don't you?" Sirius sat up, frowning. "He goes to all that work, literally to hell and back, just to save his wife. Then he ruins everything right at the last second by looking back." Sirius shrugged, paging through the book. "Some people think it's romantic." How is that romantic? Another shrug. I don't know. He fiddled with a loose thread on his jumper. Like, he loved her so much that he had to look back, because it wasn't worth leaving the underworld unless she was following. Sirius snorted. Sounds to me like he didn't trust her. Remus frowned. Maybe. When he didn't say anything else, he continued to stare down at the sleeve of his jumper, lost in thought. Sirius had nudged him. Oi, what's the next one? The next one? Remus glanced up. Oh, Icarus. Ugh, did the Greeks write any stories where everyone doesn't die at the end? That had earned him a laugh, and Sirius had settled back onto his throw pillow, smiling, cosy and content. Sirius? Lily asked. He realised that she was still waiting for him to answer. Yeah, he swallowed. I think he's doing all right. I mean, it's been hard with his mum, and the war, and everything. But, yeah, all right. Lily smiled at him, reaching out to squeeze his arm gently. Sirius smiled back at her, grateful for the touch. From the living room, they heard James cheering. Yes! Finally! Oi, you two! I've got the cushion back to normal now. Sirius ended up just tagging along with James and Lily when they left to return to the Potters, not wanting to stay in the empty flat by himself. Euphemia fussed over them when they arrived, exclaiming about how long it had been since she'd seen Sirius. She gave him one of her famous hugs, kissing his cheek as she said, "We do miss having you around, dear. You'll have to pop by more often." The house was just as festive as usual, decorated with tinsel and sparkling lights and a huge Christmas tree that made the entire living room smell like pine and sap. The ornaments hadn't been lit up yet, so Sirius spent the afternoon sorting through boxes and boxes of decorations with Lily and James, placing everything by hand, the Muggle way. Remus stayed later than he usually did at the hospice, and it was evening before the knock came at the front door. They were in the middle of decorating Christmas cookies, and Sirius was competing with Lily to see who could finish frosting their snowman the fastest, so James went to answer it. Sirius looked up eagerly when Prongs returned, but Remus wasn't with him. Seeing the confusion on Sirius's face, James explained quickly. Mooney's here, but he was knackered, went straight up to bed. Oh, Sirius blinked. Right. He turned back to their cookies, trying to muster up the same cheery smile that he'd had before, but he couldn't quite manage it. After a moment, Lily said gently, "Why don't you go and take him something to eat? Even if he's tired, I'm sure he's still hungry." Yeah, Sirius perked up a bit. Yeah, good idea. A few moments later, he was pushing the bedroom door open carefully with his shoulder. He poked his head inside and found Remus staring back at him. "I'll leave you be, if you want," he said, balancing the heavy tray gingerly. They'd loaded it up with just about everything they could find in the kitchen. I thought you might be peckish." "I'm starving." Mooney's face cracked into a smile, a genuine smile. "Thank you." Sirius smiled back, relieved, and let the door swing shut behind him, settling the tray on the bed and sitting across from Remus. As he dug in, Sirius tried to scan his face for any hints of what he might be thinking, without staring too overtly. It was a careful balance. Once Mooney had finished eating, Sirius moved the tray off the bed, placing it on the little nightstand. When he looked back, Remus was lying back on top of the blankets, one hand stretched out to his side, the other resting on his stomach. Sirius swallowed. "Shall I go?" "No." Remus took a breath. "Just don't expect too much, okay?" "Okay." He lay down beside him, staring up at the ceiling. "How's the hangover?" Remus asked after a moment. "Fine." Sirius huffed a laugh. Evans and her potions. Lily was apprenticing in the potion research department at St. Mungo's, and she'd whipped up a concoction right there in the kitchen once they'd finished cleaning. Her own twist on the classic pepper-up potion. Great. When Sirius glanced over at him, Remus had his eyes closed, brow furrowed in thought. He turned his gaze back to the ceiling, waiting for the other boy to say whatever was on his mind. "I've got a sister," he said after a few minutes of silence. "She's 8. Sirius wasn't sure what he'd been expecting, but it certainly wasn't that. Wow. Mooney reached for his hand, twisting their fingers together. Took her months to tell me. God knows what else I don't know. I wish I had more time with her. Sirius squeezed his hand, rubbing his thumb in soothing circles. Remus took a breath. I wish I had more time, but I also wish she would be more open. It really hurts, knowing that there are parts of her that she keeps private. Oh? Sirius asked casually. Yeah. Remus twisted so that they were facing each other. Sirius mirrored his position, waiting for him to continue. So I'm sorry, he murmured, tangling Sirius up in his gaze. If I ever made you feel that way. Mooney, it's just that I get worried. Remus spoke over him, words a bit rushed as he continued. That you won't. If you knew some things. There's nothing you could tell me that would change how I feel, Sirius spoke fervently, willing Mooney to understand, to look him in the eye and feel that he meant it. Remus swallowed, and something flickered in his gaze, and Sirius thought, this is it. He finally gets it. When Remus rolled onto his side, Sirius followed, pressing close and wrapping an arm around him. That mission I did, back in the summer, Remus sighed. It went really badly. I thought something happened, Sirius said gently. Go on. Do you remember how I got the last time there were werewolves nearby? Like, really pushy and not sort of thinking. That happened again. No one got hurt, but I'm pretty sure Danny thinks I'm dangerously mad now. It didn't happen to him. I think he must have felt it, but we reacted differently. I sort of took charge, not on purpose, just felt natural at the time. Sirius ran a hand up and down his arm soothingly. Well, that makes sense. That's what you do on full moons. We have to let you be the leader. Yeah, I hadn't sort of thought of it like that. So, if no one got hurt, what happened? One of the werewolves tried to attack me, but I overpowered him. Remus tensed slightly. I was supposed to get information, but all I did was rile him up. What did Moody say about it? He was cryptic. I don't think he was angry. He asked me if I minded going along next time, without Danny. But he hasn't sent me on any other missions, not proper ones. It's been months. They have to be saving you for something, Sirius assured him. I know they have to be. James keeps telling Frank and Alice how good you are at defensive magic, and they just say they can't do anything without an order from someone above them. Maybe, Remus mumbled. Sirius hesitated, then asked softly, Did he really say you had to go alone next time? He didn't say I had to, just asked if I minded. I don't think there's any other way. Danny won't work with me again. He's too scared. So I suppose, yeah, it'll just be me next time. Sirius held him a bit tighter, burying his face in the back of Remus's shirt. I hate that. Remus didn't reply. Sirius supposed there wasn't really much to say. They lay side by side, breathing, and eventually Remus drifted off to sleep.
It's such a sad affair, and I can hardly wait to be with you again.
Boxing Day, 1978. Christmas at the Potters was just as cheerful as always. though considerably quieter than some of the previous years. Mr. and Mrs. Potter weren't getting any younger, and with all the work they did for the order, in addition to Mr. Potter's job in the ministry, they simply weren't up for hosting a big Christmas party as they did in the past. Besides, the ministry and the order had warned that large gatherings should be avoided, lest they become targets for attacks that continued to increase as the months went by. Still, it was everything that Sirius had hoped for, a warm, bright respite from the darkness that seemed to permeate around so much of their lives. He and James stole the key to Mr. Potter's office, informing him that he was forbidden from working, and he laughed good-naturedly and threw his hands up and gave in to the Christmas cheer. They all gathered to exchange presents around the tree. Then there was the usual sweets and nuts and canned fruit, along with more personalised gifts. Sirius received a new album from Andromeda, as always, and Quidditch tickets to a Holyhead Harpies game from James. He watched eagerly as Remus unwrapped the brand new Doc Martens he'd got for him, and less enthusiastically as he opened the Filofax organiser from Grant, which seemed to delight him, though Sirius thought it was a rather boring gift. In the end, James and Lily seemed to do more hosting than James's parents. Euphemia still spent quite a bit of time in the kitchen, but it was Lily who organised most of the cooking, decorating and card writing, while James assumed Fleamont's typical role, making sure that everyone's drinks were topped up and leading them all into a traditional game of charades. The morning after their Christmas celebration, James and Lily headed over to her family's house for Boxing Day, which James was not very enthusiastic about. Lily had brought him to her sister's wedding as her +1 the previous summer, and he'd had an absolutely dreadful time. Sirius and Remus left with them, bidding farewell to the Potters and making their way back down to their flat to prepare for New Year's Eve. Sirius was determined to host a party, and by some miracle he'd convinced Remus to agree. "How many do you reckon we can fit in this flat anyway?" Remus mused, pushing open the door. "It's not like we've got a ballroom, and there's only one sofa." "We ought to knock through the kitchen, have it all open plan," Sirius said, striding past Remus, who had knelt to untangle his boots. The phone was ringing, so he picked it up. "Hello?" "Hello, this is Genith Rees." Sirius frowned. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't remember from where. He held out the phone to Remus. "For you, I think." Remus wobbled slightly, kicking off his boot and stumbling forward to take the phone. "Hello?" Whatever the person on the other end, Genith, said, it made Remus go pale. He sat, abruptly, on the arm of the couch, gripping it to steady himself. "Yes, that's right." Sirius watched his face, anxiously, wishing he could hear what the other person was saying. After a moment, Remus swallowed. Then, "Is she... She's gone, isn't she?" Sirius froze, feeling an awful weight settle in the pit of his stomach. She's gone. But it couldn't be. Remus began to cry, and he had his answer.
What to say to make you come again, baby? Come back to me again and play your sad guitar.
Wednesday, the 3rd of January, 1979. Sirius entered the room slowly, cautiously, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. Remus was sitting on the bed, staring blankly out of the window. It was raining, pelting droplets that twisted and slid down the glass. "Ready?" Sirius asked softly. Remus turned to look at him, with the same horrible blank flatness he'd had in his eyes since he hung the phone back on Boxing Day. He was wearing a black suit that they'd had to tailor to fit his long arms. Luckily, Mary knew a spell. His curls spilled down his neck, shaggy and lovely. He got it into his head that he should cut them for some reason, but Sirius had managed to talk him out of it. "Take your time," Sirius said gently. "We've got an hour or so." Remus nodded silently. Genith. Sirius wasn't sure exactly who he was to hope, but he seemed to be the person organising the funeral. Had told him that the service would start at 11, but Remus was welcome to come earlier if he wanted to greet the mourners. Remus hadn't said either way yet what he wanted to do, but Sirius wasn't going to push him into making a decision. After a moment, Sirius shut the door and went to sit beside him. He held Mooney's hand, running a thumb over his knuckles as they stared out at the rain together. They were quiet, for a bit. Then Remus asked, "Have you ever been to a funeral before?" "Uncle Alfred's," Sirius told him. "I was only little, though. 9 or 10. I don't remember it. I've never lost anyone close." Remus murmured, eyes following the droplets that slid down the glass. "I don't know if I knew Hope that well. I didn't even know her for a whole year." Sirius thought of Hope's bright smile, the way she'd lit up with joy when she saw her son. He thought of Remus, shy and happy, and cradling her fragile hand in his. "I don't think that matters." Remus swallowed. "Nor do I." Sirius squeezed his hand. "I'll be with you the whole time." Sirius turned to him with a smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. "Thank you." He took a breath. "Okay, I think I'm ready." He stood, and then immediately slapped his forehead, cursing. "Oh shit! The flowers! Padfoot, I forgot to pick up the bloody flowers." Sirius stood, reaching out to grip his shoulder. "I got Wormtail to do it. He's got them. And Lily's got the address for the church, so we don't get lost. And Prongs has the food for the wake. His mum sent along some pork pies and sausage rolls. And I've got the umbrellas sorted. All you need to do is apparate. Everything else is taken care of, all right?" For a moment, Remus just looked at him. Then the blank flatness cracked, and he reached out, pulling Sirius into a fierce hug. "Thank you," he breathed. Sirius hugged him back, fingers twisting in the fabric of the shirt. "Anything for our Mooney, eh?" Remus took a breath, face buried in Sirius's hair. He could feel the warm air where the taller boy exhaled as he mumbled, "Sirius." "Yeah?" "Love you." Sirius's heart leapt against his ribcage, so hard that it settled back, bruising and aching. He kissed Remus's cheek, murmuring back, "Love you too." They held hands as they walked into the living room, and Sirius continued to run his thumb over Remus's knuckles, in small, soothing circles. James, Peter, and Lily were all waiting for them, dressed in somberly black. Lily was holding a bouquet of flowers bigger than her head. "Right," Sirius said, giving Remus's hand one last squeeze. "Let's do this." Sirius didn't think that he'd ever actually been inside a Muggle church before. It was a small, quaint building, grey stone and stained glass windows, with a jutting steeple. There was a little graveyard off to one side, with mossy tombstones and tilted stone crosses. Sirius studied them as they walked up the road, though Remus had told him that Hope wasn't going to be buried. Apparently she'd wanted to be cremated. There was a tall, dark-haired man standing in the doorway, greeting each mourner as they walked in. He looked almost as bad as Remus, with the same hollow emptiness behind the polite smile that he plastered on and shook people's hands. His eyes were very red, as though he'd been crying. Sirius assumed that this was Genith. They separated from Lily and James and Peter, who went to figure out where they were meant to put all the food they'd brought along. Sirius and Remus joined the small cluster of people, waiting for their turn to shake Geneth's hand. "Hello," the tall man said, sounding utterly exhausted. "Thank you for coming." Remus shook his hand. "I'm Remus." Genith blinked, looking up at the boy as if just seeing him for the first time. "Remus," he breathed, studying him. "Hope talked about you all the time. It's a shame we're meeting like this." "Yes," Remus agreed stiffly. Sirius hovered beside them, watching as they stared at each other. Neither seemed to know what to say. After a moment, Genith shook his head slightly and ushered them inside. "Go in," he waved to the door. "Your mum was keen on you sitting in the front row, but it's up to you." "Thanks," Remus said, still stiff and awkward. "See you after, eh?" Genith reached out to pat his shoulder. "Yeah. Good." Remus didn't move. After a moment, Sirius nudged him, guiding him gently into the church. They walked to the front, slowly, and sat down in the first row, the way Hope had wanted. Around them, a few of the funeral-goers began to whisper. Sirius held his head high, chin jutting out defiantly, daring any of them to try and say anything to Remus. Sirius struggled to follow along with most of the service. There was a lot of praying, and some recitation, and various people stood up and talked about Hope's life. Sirius kept glancing at Remus, distracted, wishing that he could reach out and hold his boyfriend's hand. Mooney stayed slumped in his seat, staring blankly ahead at the floor. From the rows around them, some sniffing could be heard, along with a few muffled sobs. There was a little girl, who Sirius realised with a start must have been Remus's half-sister. She'd cried more than anyone, keeping her head buried in the skirts of an elderly woman, who Sirius assumed was her grandmother. The sight made his chest ache. Sirius had only met Hope once, but it was clear that she had been very loved. When the service had ended, Remus didn't move. As the rest of Hope's family filed out, he remained stiff in his seat, staring straight ahead, with the same empty gaze. Sirius sat beside him, waiting until the church was nearly empty to lean over and whisper, "You okay?" Remus nodded once. Sirius glanced around, then reached out to brush his fingers over Mooney's knee. "That was really sad. It's okay if you're tired and want to go home." "No, it's fine." Remus's voice was scratchy. He cleared his throat. "I ought to go. I told Genith I would. Just 5 more minutes." They continued to sit until the caretaker came to tidy up, clearing his throat meaningfully as he began to sweep around the pews. Everyone was in the church hall, a small, drab room that felt far too crowded with all the mourners crammed into it. Some of the people were cheerful, smiling and chuckling as they shared stories about Hope's life. Others were quiet and subdued, sniffling into tissues and dabbing teary eyes. The 3 trestle tables set up against one wall were practically overflowing with food, and next to them there was a woman handing out cups of milky tea. Sirius followed Remus as he drifted aimlessly through the crowd, ending up in front of another trestle table, ending up in front of another trestle table. This one was full of muggle pictures, photographs and albums, all strange and static and unmoving. The woman displayed in them was not the woman Sirius recognised from the hospital. She was happy and healthy, glowing with joy and life. For a moment, Sirius felt a directionless burst of anger. This was the mother Remus deserved, and instead he'd only been allowed 10 months with her wasting shadow. "She'd be glad you came," Genith said, approaching from behind. He reached out, unthinkingly, and ran a hand over the picture frames. It was a photograph of Hope in the summer, on the beach, smiling up at the camera as she wiggled her toes into the sand. "I had to," Remus replied, staring down at the picture. He turned to Genith. "I wish I had been there to say goodbye." "It was very quiet, like she was," Genith told him gently. "She was awake on Christmas morning and went to sleep after lunch. There was no pain." Remus stiffened slightly, turning back to the display. "I know what you're thinking," Genith said, gesturing to the photos. "No pictures of you. It wasn't deliberate. She put them all in a box for me to send to you. Only I've lost track of your address." "I don't want them," Remus said flatly. "Remus." Sirius placed a hand on his arm. "Don't make any decisions yet." Remus shrugged him off. "There are a few other bits," Genith said slowly, eyes darting to Sirius as if unsure how he fit into this. "I'll hang on to them, as long as you like." "Bits?" Remus asked hollowly. "Things she wanted you to have," Genith explained. "No money or anything." "I'm not interested in money," Remus snapped. Genith drew back a bit, surprised by the outburst, and gave him a hurt look. Sirius glanced back and forth between the two of them, anxiously. Remus stepped back, shaking his head. I'm sorry. I can't be here, I'm sorry. He turned and fled, not quite running, but hurrying out of the hall quickly enough that he turned a few heads. Sirius looked back to Genith, saying quickly, Sorry, look, have you got a piece of paper? Genith blinked at him, startled, then mumbled, Oh, yeah, here. He pulled a napkin out of his pocket. And a pen? Sirius asked. Genith frowned, patting his pockets. After a moment, he pulled one out and gave it to Sirius. Thanks. Sirius snatched the napkin and placed it on the table, taking a moment to write down the address of his garage. Look, you can send the boxes here, all right? He just needs some time to process things. Genith nodded, looking a bit wary as he took back the napkin and pen. Thank you. I'm sorry, but I don't think I caught your name. Sirius. I'm sorry? Sirius. Sirius Black. Sorry, but I better go and check on him. Oh, all right. Well, thank you. Sirius nodded, smiling tightly before he turned and hurried out the door. He caught sight of Lily, James, and Peter hovering near the tables of food on his way out. He made eye contact with James, nodding towards the door. The three of them followed after him immediately. Remus was already halfway down the road, walking away from the church. Sirius had to jog to catch up, calling out, Remus! I want to go, the other boy said once they reached him. You can come back to Mum and Dad's if you want, James offered. Mum said she'll do his dinner. No. Remus reached out, gripping Sirius's arm desperately. Please, can we just go back to the flat? Just you and me. Yeah, of course we can, Sirius assured him, placing his own hand over Remus's. It was what Mooney needed, Sirius thought as they apparated. Some time alone, just the two of them, in their own space, their own world, where they could forget everything. But of course, that was too much to ask. The owl was already waiting for them when they arrived back at the flat, perched on the mantelpiece. It extended its leg as they walked in, offering a little note that someone had tied to it. They read it together. Remus, my condolences. Please meet me at the Aura's office at 9 a.m. on Monday. Moody.
Don't you remember you told me you loved me, baby? You said you'd be coming back.